I think there has been times when the wah-wah pedal flourished. Like when it first hit the scene, everybody was using it, you know what I mean? Because everybody wanted to sound like their heroes or whatever. Or a specific piece of music, if you were playing it in a band, you had to have that in order to make make it sound real.
Yeah, I think the genres that the wah was able to find its way into are really varied.
It is heard in jazz, it is heard in reggae. Miles Davis had his side players do the wah-wah through their keyboards, for example, and of course he did it through his trumpet, and King Curtis did it through his sax.
Stevie Wonder sounds great with a wah pedal on the clav.
It started out as kind of a rock deal with Hendrix, but before you know it, you've got wah being used in R&B and soul, and finding its way into everything from jingles to X-rated movie soundtracks.
Come and knock on our door.
Come and knock on our door.
Been waiting for you.
As with anything in music or pop culture, the wah-wah pedal fell out of favor at a certain point.
Probably towards the late 70s, I think it had reached the point where people had heard it a lot, and it kind of went away for a while.
I think what caused the wah to perhaps fall a little bit from popularity was it just got overused.
Well, if you look at the time when bell-bottoms fell out of favor, I think the wah-wah might have gone with it. The two are hand in hand. But I don't know, to me, both of them are always cool.
Well, I think in the beginning it was probably a rebellion against classic rock, right? When I was a kid during the sort of new wave punk rock era, we were, my cover band in high school, we'd be playing the Police or the Ramones or whatever, and I pretty much stopped using the wah.
There was a time where I kind of looked around and said, and then thought to myself, wow, no one else is using wah. Am I like just being an old fuddy-duddy?
If you used the wah pedal, you were kind of a throwback. You weren't moving forward, You were like, oh, you're trying to sound like Led Zeppelin or Jimi Hendrix, and we're going this way now.
Also in the 80s was the rise of the racks. I think guitar players got really seduced into using a lot of rack effects processors, which were just really coming into vogue at the time.
And so what's the next thing? And the next thing is this digital revolution. Now it's electronica coming into the studio.
There were a lot of effects that were coming out like crazy when I was doing sessions in LA. These guys were coming in with pedal boards and you had tons of stuff. Suddenly you had so many effects and carting them around. I think that had an impact on say, how much you may use the wah-wah or try all these effects.
It's another tool in the toolbox, and a lot of other things came along. And as time went on, guitar players, being the seekers that they are, they look for different sounds.
Wah pedals have a particular sound to them, but they also have a bit of a history to them in terms of their dependability in roadworthy situations. They tended to wear out and break or sound different at different stages, so people usually had several of them in case one broke, but the problem is they didn't all consistently sound the same. Some would have a different taper, and you'd play it and like, oh, this one doesn't have the magic feel,
Utilizing it in the beginning, like in the early 60s, that was a primitive piece of gear. Not to say it's not primitive now, because it's basically a simple electromechanical device, but it was the way the components were put together.
They just grabbed whatever was available from whatever manufacturer and put it together. And I think the sound of the pedals changing was much more happenstance by availability of parts. And you see some really interesting inconsistencies that you look at, and most of it has to do with the actual inductor that's inside the pedal.
An inductor can be made out of dozens of different kinds of ferrite metals, and that's one of the things that gives wahs their personality is who made the inductor, what it's made of.
I don't know if I got the order exact, but the Clyde McCoy started with the halos, and then they did the, it's kind of like a big metal can, looks like a film canister. Then there's the Phasal. The Phasal, though, also came in a bunch of different colors. Then it goes to the TDK and the Stack of Dimes.
If you look at the schematic for the wah-wah pedal, it's 500 millihenry. But you know, it's plus or minus 10%, man, back then.
So a lot of the designs either suffered or benefited by that. And the way it would suffer is that every pedal would sound different. Yet, what it did create was this magical aligning of parts and the drift to where some pedals just sounded so sweet and others, not so sweet.
Those changes did apparently cause some rather large differences to people who had good ears. I would imagine to the guys who were making the financial decisions, one sounded pretty much as good as the other. And so that had to get sorted out.
As best we can tell, the two wahs created by the engineers at Thomas Organ, the Vox and Crybaby, continued to be produced by Thomas and Vox from factories in Italy, England, and America until the late 70s, when the companies ended their relationship and the pedals were temporarily orphaned.
I can remember around the time that Whirlpool closed up Thomas Organ, and along with it the Crybaby, I just figured, well, that's the end of the wah-wah pedal. And Jim Dunlop wasn't having any of that, apparently.
When I started this company, I worked for 9 years as a part-time job.
For a while there, he was kind of known as the collector of accessories, because if other people had accessories that they made and couldn't manufacture them themselves, they would take them to my dad, and we would end up making them here. And the Crybaby was just one of the first electronic effects that we did.
When I bought the Crybaby pedal in 1982, it was off the market, I think, 6 months. Rose Morris at that time in England, who was a distributor, purchased the Vox name, but they didn't want to buy the Crybaby pedal because they didn't want to get into the accessory business. So I thought, I'm up for that. And so I called the vice president at Whirlpool, and he said, well, if you give me some more money than I'm getting right now, you can have it, because he was tired of having it.
I think Whirlpool's a big company that wasn't really into the music business, you know, and I think it was just this one little bastard child that was out there that really wasn't making the returns that they expected, and it seemed like it was abandoned, you know, at the low point in the late 70s.
All the tooling was in Sepulveda. We picked it all up and brought it back to Benicia. And when we got into the Crybaby in the beginning, we struggled with it. But we got it back, I believe, in around about 9 months.
I went to a NAMM show and saw the stand there, and I was very pleased to know that somebody else was going to be doing the original one. I mean, there were certainly enough knockoffs.
You know, that was our baby. We picked it up and we brought it back to life.
You know, it's a simple circuit, and it uses a few amount of components, and nobody was thinking years ago the wah pedal being on a 100-foot stage with the gear all behind in a modern, you know, stage production. Well, that circuit needs a little help when you start putting it there.
The potentiometers were a high failure mechanism which relied on an old pot that was built for the military.
That's the thing that takes the hit, you know, is the pot itself.
Because as you geared it down, it would just rub up against this thing, and if it got dirty, any kind of dust or anything got on it, it would be making noise.
They started using nice sealed pots
that normally will exceed well and beyond 3.5 million cycles.
That's a lot of cycles. That's a lot of wah-wahs, you know.
From the knowledge that I gained over the years, having to modify wahs or just keep them working, or just these certain simple things like
the jacks have been improved.
A switch that cycles over 500,000 cycles.
An AC adapter.
And inductors that were quiet, non-microphonic.
So that they don't act quite, they're not quite as radio antenna-like.
Putting in a proper 100% bypass switch in so that your signal that feeds the thing's not loaded by the circuit even though it's bypassed.
Light emitting diodes that tell you the Crybaby whether it's on or off.
Well, I think the biggest thing that Dunlop did was introduce the 535Q. I think that was the most adjustable and flexible wah you could buy at the time. The inclusion of controls to adjust the frequency and a control to adjust the bandwidth gave players the ability to truly personalize the wah.
I was, what, 23 working on that pedal, you know, and it was like, you know, what do we do now, you know? So we put the preamp boost in it, you know, let's put a 5-position switch, let's throw it all in there. It's making the kitchen sink.
You know, that little bit of tweakability there, you know, in terms of having different voices that you could switch between, you know, and the ability to go inside if you want and fine tune it, because that's what a tweaker does. You want to make something your own.
What I used to do though with my wah-wahs is it has like these teeth that make the pot turn. I would always change the setting from the factory setting, and because I don't like it real for it to go really bright.
I guess there's a wheel or something in the inside, and it sets how trebly it gets, and I needed more high end on it. So I took it apart, and I had a guy who was a little more technically orientated than me fixed that wheel inside so that it went a little further.
If anything, what it's already existing, you just try and tweak it or make it thicker sounding. So, you know, with my pedal, with the rocker, you got more high end and there's more low end. So it's just scooped out more.
I mean, you know, a lot of wah pedals, they have wider sweeps. I don't really go for that.
I know Hendrix changed his to make it a slightly lower tone than the original Crybaby.
Well, certainly Jimmy's pedals were tweaked. Roger Mayer would get in there with a screwdriver, take it all apart, and mess with the resistors, the capacitors, put different little transistors in, screw around with the response of the pedal. I mean, he would change all kinds of crap in there just to give it a different feel.
You know, now you can just have like a rotary switch on some that just changed the cue, and you know, or if you had a little screwdriver out and changed the little pot there, and it's like, you know, that kind of stuff has become a common thing for people to know about and do, but it's through years of other people's experience that those ideas have been implemented in the pedal.